Are Marvel movies getting worse? It's a question echoing all over the internet right now, sparking just endless debates. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to bypass the endless Reddit opinions and look strictly at the numbers. Today, we're exploring exactly how the Marvel Cinematic Universe has trended in recent years, and how one specific hero has essentially become a massive statistical anomaly, literally single-handedly carrying the universe's audience scores on his webbed shoulders.
Here's the agenda for today's explainer. First, the MCU by the numbers. 2. Are Marvel movies slumping? 3. Critics versus audience scores. 4. Spider-Man's unmatched dominance. And finally, 5. The exclusive 90/90 Club.
All right, let's dive into section 1, the MCU by the numbers, setting the baseline. So before we can even talk about a slump, we really have to look at the standard Marvel set over its incredible run of 44 movies and TV series. 81.88%. That is the staggering historical average for the Rotten Tomatoes audience score across the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. And what's truly fascinating here is that this is almost identical to the 81.84% average tomatometer score from critics. I mean, in Hollywood, that kind of consistency is almost unheard of for individual films, let alone across an entire sprawling decade-plus universe. It set an absolutely incredibly high bar.
Moving on to section 2. Are Marvel movies slumping? Let's look at the Phase 4 and 5 drop.
There has been this really loud cultural narrative going around recently that the golden era of comic book movies is over. And for the most part, critics generally agree the MCU peaked back in Phase 3, where a massive 58% of their movies scored above a 75% average critic score. But then, we hit Phase 4, and much like the multiverse itself, things got pretty chaotic. Phase 4 actually became the very first MCU phase without a single movie surpassing a 75% Metacritic score. Outside of a few bright spots, the legacy franchises were just simply not living up to their predecessors. The contrast is honestly drastic. In Phase 3, Black Panther just soared with a 96% critic score and a perfect A+ cinema score. But heading into the multiverse saga, things got really rocky. Eternals dropped to a 47% critic score and received the MCU's first ever B grade from audiences. Then, Ant-Man Quantumania opened Phase 5 with a 46% critic score and a historically low B-. For CinemaScore voters, this marked the absolute roughest 8-movie stretch in the history of the MCU. Which brings us to Section 3, critics versus audience scores and the growing divide. So this data leaves us with a huge question. If the critics are kind of souring on the multiverse, who is actually keeping the ship afloat for audiences? Because while the critical reception definitely took a noticeable dive across the board, the audience reaction actually reveals a wildly different perspective. Get this, technically, Phase 4 is actually the highest-rated phase in the MCU for Rotten Tomatoes audiences, sitting at an 88% average compared to Phase 3's 83%. Every single critic metric points to Phase 4 being the worst, but audiences couldn't disagree more. So how is this even possible when movies like Eternals and Wakanda Forever were dragging averages down in other metrics? Well, it's because specific massive hits absolutely carried the team and dragged those audience averages way up. And that leads us perfectly into Section 4, Spider-Man's unmatched dominance, the true statistical superhero. When other major tentpoles like Doctor Strange and Thor fail to provide spikes for audiences, there's one franchise that single-handedly rescues the numbers. Looking at franchises with a minimum of 3 films, Spider-Man holds a staggering 91.6% average. He completely overshadows the mighty Avengers at 86.5% and just leaves Thor far behind at 78.6%. Spider-Man is the clear, undeniable statistical outlier driving intense audience satisfaction. Let's zoom in on 2021 specifically. As the Gator's Eye noted, Spider-Man No Way Home has saved the MCU's 2021. Now, why does this matter? Earlier that year, crowd scores for Black Widow and Eternals had heavily depleted the MCU's overall averages. No Way Home acted as a real-world hero. Its immense popularity literally raised the MCU's average Rotten Tomatoes audience score across the entire board from 82 up to 83%. He literally put the universe on his back. 98%. That is the staggering Rotten Tomatoes audience score for Spider-Man No Way Home. To put that into perspective for you, it outperformed the previous MCU average by an astonishing 17 points. When other movies were experiencing historic critical drops, Spider-Man was right there to drag the entire statistical universe upward, keeping audiences heavily invested. Finally, Section 5, the exclusive 90/90 Club, Basically, the highest echelon. So, what is the 90/90 Club? It's our definition for a highly exclusive list. Just 12 Marvel properties released since 2008 have achieved both tomatometer and audience scores at or above 90%. It represents an almost unheard of level of consensus for major global blockbusters. You rarely see critics and audiences agree like this. And take a look at who sits right at the very top of this list. Spider-Man No Way Home holds the highest overall average of any MCU property. But it's really not a fluke. Spider-Man Far From Home is also right there in the club. While the broader MCU experiences these massive, unpredictable fluctuations, Spider-Man sequels consistently exceed expectations alongside hits like Shang-Chi in the original Iron Man. He isn't just surviving the franchise slump, he's setting the gold standard. Which really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We've seen exactly how polarizing recent phases have been, marked by historic critical drops, yet completely buoyed by incredibly high audience averages, carried by a few key outliers. So as we look ahead, can the MCU bounce back on its own across its wider, diverse slate of characters? Or will they continually need to rely on the web slinger to swing in and save their data over and over again? Thank you so much for joining this explainer. Keep analyzing the numbers, and we'll see you next time.